What's up guys, how's it going? Sean here, and today it's time to talk about Alpha 2. Did the game get better? Did it stay about the same? Or did it somehow get worse? First, let's cover some quick stats. Alpha number 1 had about 300 players. When we asked for feedback, we got 121 responses, which was about a 40% rate. 86% of our players rated the game a 4 or higher. We had a 59% to 41% split between Steam and Android players, so 60-40. And a quarter of our players, 24%, played over 10 hours. Now, comparing that to Alpha 2, we had about 500 players, 200 of which were returning. We got 150 responses, which is a 30% rate, a little bit lower, but to be expected because a lot of them were people that were playing again, so they probably didn't want to fill out the same feedback form, even though it was a little bit different. 91% of players this time rated the game a 4 or higher. Worth mentioning that slightly less of those rating it higher chose a 5 than last time, but this was a very small number. As far as I'm concerned, it's negligible. This time we had a 66 to 34 split for Steam to Android, so a little bit more of a showing on the Steam side. But one of the biggest things I noticed is that 46% of the Alpha 2 players played over 10 hours. That's almost double the same number for Alpha 1, which I thought was pretty impressive. Also, only 3 people played less than 1 hour. Okay, now let's jump into the difficulty rating and some of the more detailed questions and answers. Okay, so this time the difficulty curve seemed much more balanced than Alpha 1. We had a lot more players rating the game a 3 in terms of difficulty, as opposed to a 4 or 5. Last time we had actually more players rating the game a 4 out of 5 in difficulty. So I'm very happy to see this drop down to a 3. That's very close to what we want it to be at. Now you can make a point and say the number of players rating it 4 as opposed to 2 is a little off balance, like we prefer to see that a little more equal, or if anything more people onto the 2 side. Because keep in mind, Soda Dungeon is not intended to be an objectively difficult game, at least to begin with. At the beginning of the game, we want the first 100 levels to feel very smooth. So if people are getting stuck before they even get to the second dimension, that's kind of a problem because they're not going to stick around for the second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. You know, I'm not saying we want to make the game too easy, but if we can get people through that first dimension and sort of solidify the game loop to them, I think they're a lot more likely to stick around and keep playing the game. Whereas if they get frustrated in Dimension 1, they might just stop playing. So then we asked some questions about a couple of new mechanics we added to Alpha 2. First off was a pretty simple one. We added the ability to level up items to the Blacksmith. So in Soda Dungeon 1, you might be familiar with the idea that as you go through the dungeon, you can get a level 1 to 10 version of most items. Not accessories, but generally any weapon or shield or armor set. And so that's still in Soda Dungeon 2. As you go deeper into the dungeon, you can still get the leveled versions of those items. But to sort of add an extra element to the game, we added the ability for the blacksmith, who is now in his own shop, to basically upgrade your items for you from level 1 to 2 to 3, etc. And we introduced a new item called smithing crystals that allow you to do that. And those crystals can be bought from the blacksmith, or from you can find them in the dungeon too. Now they come in different tiers. So at first you can use blue smithing crystals, then you move to red, to yellow, to green, and only the blue ones can be bought. And you have to find the red ones and so on. So generally speaking, aside from some kind of UI complaints and some quality of life issues with the blacksmith, most people seem to like it. Some found it kind of annoying, and I'd like to stress that this is meant to be optional. You know, in Soda Dungeon 1, it's just something that never existed. And in Soda Dungeon 2, you still can find those items. But because of the fact that more resources drop in the game, you're slightly less likely to find certain items. So this is just kind of a nice extra on the side thing if you want to spend some of your gold, or if you want to get some crystals, you can get a few extra item levels out of it. Now the big addition, of course, was soda scripting, which I've been talking about for a long time. So we generally just asked, did you utilize, in the game, we're currently calling it the Battle School. So you build the arena in your town, the arena has ranked combat, and then it has the Battle School. And the Battle School is where you set up your soda scripts and assign them to your characters. So we asked, did you utilize that system? And 38% said yes, I used it and assigned a custom script to a class. 31% said yes, I browsed the system, I know it exists, but I didn't really do anything with it. 19% just said no, which to me that means they are aware that such a thing exists, but just didn't want to use it. And then 11.5% said I have no idea what you're talking about. and that's totally fine. So the thing is with SodaScript, I knew from the beginning that it was going to be a feature that I wouldn't necessarily call it a hardcore feature, but I knew it was going to target the more dedicated players of the game, because it's a level of interaction that was previously never required, and it still isn't. In Soda Dungeon 2, if you turn on auto combat, you're still going to get basically the same Soda Dungeon 1 auto combat settings you've always had. It's still completely possible to play through the game that way. So to work on a feature that is basically targeting more, you know, involved or dedicated, advanced, whatever user base you want to call that, to target them and still get 38% of them using the system actively is something I'm totally okay with, and I'm more than happy to continue to support a feature that, you know, basically almost 40% of players want to use. We then asked a number of questions about what people liked and didn't like about the alpha, and also sort of comparing it to Soda Dungeon 1. And, you know, based on the fact that most people rated the game a 4 or 5, most of the comments about what people liked and disliked were very positive. But of course, that's not what we're most interested in. We always enjoy hearing those comments, and we want to know what people liked, of course. But it's kind of more important to us to know what people didn't like, because that's what we need to change or fix about the game. So of course I can't read these all off in the video or anything, but I went through and I tried to sort of take note of general observations, comments that I saw coming up a lot, sort of general trends that I saw, that certain things were that people were getting frustrated with, or generally a lot of people felt one way or the other on. Probably one of the biggest issues we need to sort of address is the people didn't like the RNG involved in getting certain resource drops. And that's a bit of a problem, because in Soda Dungeon 2, we've slightly shifted the general gameplay loop and upgrading system to favor resource drops. So a rat dropping a pelt or finding certain ore in the dungeon. Overall, people really like these mechanics, but what we did is we started to tie them to some of the upgrades in the game. So for example, some of the sodas, it would be like, all right, well, if you want to hire the thief, you got to pay for the soda, and then you also have to find like some caramel or like a feather or something, right? Just some resources to make that soda. And we did that with some of the other buildings as well. And we found that it really just wasn't fun because of the randomness. It just meant that, you know, even if you had the resources, if you had the gold to buy something, you just kind of had to wait and grind for the certain items. And we tried to avoid that going into it. I tried to pick items that that theoretically would have been found at this point. You know, hopefully, I was thinking by the time you go to buy the thief that you would have probably already found the items you need for it. But I think we're better off just removing those requirements altogether, at least for most of the upgrades, especially the sodas, because the sodas and the classes are core to the game. So you don't want to lock important characters behind randomization, right? You just want to be able to unlock those characters outright. For some of the upgrades, I either removed the requirement or reduced them, or increased the drop rate for the required resources in the dungeon itself. So it's just more likely you're going to come across it. I also just generally increased the overall drop rate of items in the dungeon, just because, you know, it's just, like people said, it's just not fun if you're not getting stuff. Even if you're getting a lot of resources, right now we have a lot of resources in the game, and not everything can be used. So you kind of run into this problem where in Soda Dungeon 1, you could make constant forward progress no matter what. But in Soda Dungeon 2, you still can, but sometimes some of that progress gets, I don't want to say gated, but sometimes that progress can be delayed if you're not getting a few items in the dungeon. Also, because less usable items are dropping, so less swords and, and shields and armor. Because less of those are dropping, you're less likely to get that next tier of item that you need. So again, like I said, I've already tweaked the drop rate, so generally everything drops a bit more often. You're also more likely to get just plain items. And I think we're going to make a shift in some of the crafting where, you know, there's a number of items that, and things you can craft, and most of them will still be there, but some of them I think we would be better suited to make crafting items the more unique and interesting, not necessarily better, right? So if something's just really good, like it does a lot of damage or has a high crit rate or something else, I think those items are still, they still belong in the dungeon, at least some of them. And I would like to try and relegate certain items to the blacksmith for crafting that are more unique and interesting. So for example, we have a frying pan item that when you hit enemies with it, there's a chance to burn them and a chance to make them drop a piece of food. Now that item, that frying pan is never going to be a top tier item. It's kind of a novelty type thing, right? But it's fun if you take a minute to like go aside, craft it, go into battle, and like, you know, go stock up on food items, or maybe you want to sell them, or maybe you need them for the kitchen, or maybe you just want food. I don't know. But the point is, we definitely need to kind of adjust our focus in that area. Tied into all that is just the fact that a few people seem to be remarking that just overall it felt more difficult than Soda Dungeon 1, which is kind of what I was talking about before, where we don't want people getting stuck on the first 100 levels and not enjoying the game. Now, we obviously made a lot of progress here because people rated the difficulty level much lower and much more evened out, especially considering this was just the first 2 dimensions. So, you know, we don't really want the game to get hard until at least like toward the end of Dimension 2, if not 3. Additionally, I would like to sort of, and this is an idea we've talked about a lot, and it's just kind of a bit on the back burner, and we're planning to do. It's just, you know, there's a lot of stuff we can work on. We need to try and stick with the soda theme for the game. So we've always talked about the idea of a soda brewery, where you can basically, in this example, you'd be able to take these resources, like all this stuff that the enemies are dropping, and you could use them to craft kind of like one-time usage. You could call them potions if you want, but they're sodas. You know, one-time use sodas to go into the next dungeon trip, and each soda would do something specific. Like maybe one soda gives you that extra 10% gold boost for the next run. Maybe one soda gives you some extra attack power for the next run. Maybe one soda gives you some extra... I mean, basically a lot of the same things that the items and relics always do, but an additional special boost that's temporary that you can only get from crafting certain sodas to get that. So I think that will be good, because that is not required to progress through the game. It's sort of just an additional bonus if you can get those sodas crafted, because if you don't, you're still going to continue through the game and get new items. Lastly, something I saw people mention a few times, not a ton, but enough to kind of take note of, is that some people weren't a huge fan of the scrolling town. So if you've seen us post on Twitter or any of our GIFs or videos, I don't know if we've done, I mean, I've had the game on here on these videos, so you've probably seen it. But we're focusing on the idea that you can build a town, so not everything is crammed into the tavern. You kind of tap and scroll through, or click and drag to go through your town and check out the different buildings. And I think overall it's a good direction for the game, because it allows us to expand in a lot of ways and it doesn't restrict us. But that also means it can be annoying sometimes. If the blacksmith is on the other side of town and you come back and you want to craft something, then you got to take an extra second to scroll through and get to him. So obviously there's a couple easy fixes to that. That's why I'm not too worried about it. Whether it's whether I let people move buildings around, change the order so they can put the blacksmith right next to the tavern, that's an easy solution. Or we can always do a quick select menu that when you come back, you can, click an icon in the top left or right or somewhere that just brings up a quick list just of all the buildings you have, and you can just click on one directly instead of having to scroll through any number of other things. And I think that covers most of the complaints we had. And just like Alpha 1, we like to kind of end our questionnaire with a couple of big ones, where we say, does Soda Dungeon 2 feel like a proper sequel? And does it feel too much like Soda Dungeon 1? So again, we compared these to the results from Alpha number 1. So Alpha number 1, 80% of players said Soda Dungeon 2 felt like a proper sequel, 10% said no, 10% said unsure. In Alpha 2, 86% said yes, it feels like a proper sequel, 6% said no, and 8% were unsure. So definite improvement there. I'm happy with that. And then for the question, does it feel too much like Soda Dungeon 1? In Alpha 1, 17% said yes. Alpha 2, only 9% said yes. Now, at the end of the day, if the worst complaint someone has about the game is that it feels too much like Soda Dungeon 1, well, it could be a lot worse. So, again, I'm just happy that number is improving. Going from 17 down to 9, I think is very good. And this is still only Alpha 2. So, we don't currently have plans for an Alpha 3. What I've been telling everyone so far, we've had a lot of questions about it. Our plan is to move to an open beta later this year, and if we've made this notable progress from Alpha 1 to Alpha 2, I'm already happy with what people say about Alpha 2, and we still have new features to add. We're still only at Dimension 2, and there's just a lot more polishing we have to do too. So, I mean, overall, I think we're on track, and I really can't complain too much. Now, I know not everyone got a chance to play, so if you're watching this and you didn't get a chance, I apologize. But in these early stages, we really try to keep it somewhat restrained just to minimize the impact of releasing a work in progress. You know, the last thing we want to do is put the game out and someone, you know, takes a bunch of screenshots or records a video that isn't me, and they start associating Soda Dungeon 2 with this unfinished imagery, and if that gets caught up in the search engines too much, then before you know it, people search for our game and they keep finding this content that looks like it's an incomplete game or it has bugs or something like that. So that's just kind of why we have to keep it on the download a little bit. But that's also why we want to move to open beta, because we know we have a lot of people that want to play. Obviously, we benefit from more and more feedback. The more people that play, the more people can respond to our questionnaires or our polls, and the easier it is to move the game in a certain direction. Now, of course, going from Alpha 2 with 500 players to an open beta with who knows how many players is a big jump, and it's a little bit scary, but I think we'll be okay. Now, I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about with Alpha 2. Can't really complain, pretty happy overall. Now, my original goal was to do one video a month, and I kind of fell off that schedule a little bit, but I mean, that's also because my son was born, so I'm sure you can understand that's affected my schedule a little bit. So I don't know if I'm gonna stick to one a month. If nothing else, my goal is one every 2 months, which I think is still very doable, just because I have less time to work with over here, we have a lot to get done on the game, and that's about it, really. Now, next video, I might finally do a video talking about some of the class mastery stuff that I'd mentioned before. I might talk about how we've revisited the gem system a little bit. There's always a number of things to talk about, but I'll figure that out when we get a little bit closer to that date. As always, guys, thanks for following the progress of the game. Thanks for being patient. If you want the hottest, latest, freshest Soda Dungeon updates, you can follow us on Twitter. That's usually where we post things first. But any of our social media channels tend to always have the same information within a few days. So until next time, guys, take care.